Thanks, Esther. I'm going to present to you a little bit about our Measure Together program, which I will shortly introduce because I didn't know how familiar you were with Measure Together, but I want to start basically where you did end because I think it's interesting that it's called Measure Together and not just RIVM. What we really try is to make it a community, but also to get maybe a little bit of shared infrastructure because as you did, I think you raised the issue of how do we get institutes to interact with air pollution issues and all the with their official roles. I think positioning yourself as more as a community or maybe slightly loose from your official institute sometimes helps in projects like Dutch Skies because it gives us a little bit more flexibility. So that's just to pick up from where you ended. I just want to do a few things because it's almost 5. Just to give a very short introduction, what is Measure Together, some technical developments, some other developments, and then some issues that go beyond air quality. Just to give a short recap, the project Measure Together is funded by the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, and basically the main question is, what is the added value of low-cost sensors for air quality? And originally it started as let's say, data question, or maybe even an economic question. When we have a lot of sensor data, maybe we can close some of the expense of official monitoring stations. And I think it slowly evolved towards a more nuanced picture where it's not only about the data, but also more about how does it change the role of RIVM? How does it change the role of citizens when they measure air quality themselves? Because they get a bigger role in the monitoring, which also maybe allows it to create more trust between official governments and citizens. So we call it data in dialogue. So at the moment, I think we receive data from about 3,000 air quality sensors in the Netherlands, which equals over 4 billion measurements. And there are a few big initiatives that we receive data from. So Sensor Community, the International Citizen Tech Initiative, I think is over 2,000 sensors. Has over 2,000 sensors in the Netherlands, so that's a large part of our data. Sniffer Bike, which is also used by Dutch Skies or Sodac Air. We have a few sensors of our own that we employ. We use NO tubes, and we also move in some of the other, let's say, environmental parameters. And what we try to do is build towards a more, let's say, on a national scale, a citizen science or a citizen sensing infrastructure, which has let's say 4 elements. So we have a data portal. We do a little bit of research on the sensor, on the hardware, the actual how do the sensors perform when we compare them to our official measurements. We really try to contribute to a larger community. So we have a website where we share our knowledge, our information, and where we direct towards other projects. And we do a lot of data science. Does the actual sensor data improve our modeling? Are there ways to improve the measurements of citizens? So those 4 pillars are the basis of what we increasingly call a national citizen science infrastructure. So just a very brief overview of, let's say, the more technical developments. I'm not sure how familiar you're all with the sensors, but the sensors for a particulate matter, they have issues, especially they're sensitive to external factors like humidity. And what we try to do is to correct for those external factors. And I'm not going to go into detail how we do that, but basically we compare groups of sensors to our official measurements and do some kind of a spatial interpolation and then compare the different data or the different measurements. And we correct the sensor data for the external factors. And we now do that both for the SDS 011, the Nova Fitness, but also for the Sensira and the SPS 30. And on the right, you can see a graph where you can see the difference. Sometimes it's quite a large difference, especially in the early mornings when there's mist or where the humidity is high. The sensor will give you much higher values than you would expect based on, well, the actual air quality. So we correct for that. And if you're interested in the exact procedure, then there's a very recent article by Joost Westeling and others where they basically compare different calibration methods from different institutes. They created a synthetic data set, and then they use different calibration algorithms and then compared the outcomes of the different algorithms. So if you're interested in, I highly recommend it to read that. Then I said to you, Hester, I didn't change anything, but I did change something which isn't in this presentation, because here it says we use volunteers, but volunteers help us. That's, I think, more correct. To increase the spatial coverage. So if we want to improve the calibration algorithm, we need to have spatial coverage. And there's places in the Netherlands, especially close to the border, where the modeling is not very great because we have a less detailed emission data. And also there's fewer official measurements. So those are the places where we actually want to increase the number of measurements. So we have a yearly day at RIVM where we invite citizen scientists and other policymakers. And then we just ask, like, we're looking for volunteers in this area. Is there somebody living in this area, or do you know someone who lives there and who wants to employ a sensor? And then within, let's say, an hour or a few hours, we have enough spatial coverage. Only the islands in the north are sometimes a problem, but apart from that, we can really increase the spatial coverage. And the other thing we do, we co-locate a lot of sensors at official reference stations to use those comparisons also to improve the calibration algorithm. So just to see that we really try to look for the, let's say, the win-win situation where we ask something of the community, namely, could you measure something with a sensor? And we try to give something back. We improve the quality of your sensor measurement. So what are, let's say, the ongoing technical developments? One of the things that we're currently doing in the European context, the fair mode context, I'm not sure if that's a familiar term, but we really try to improve on the data fusion. So we have a lot of different data sources for air quality, the modeling, the official measurements, the sensor measurements, and we try to combine those to improve the hourly air quality maps, and to do it a bit more systematic than we currently do, because you can already find these maps on our data portal, but we really want to systematically evaluate this approach. And the other thing that we're doing, especially in the more urban areas like Rotterdam, we try to gain insights in the biases in our modeling. So we know that that there may be biases in the modeling. For instance, the burning of wood is notoriously difficult to estimate the emissions from that, because we don't know when people burn wood. And sensor data, because of the high spatial and temporal resolution, could maybe be a way of improving on that. So that's another avenue that we're exploring. Very short about some other things that we do. Hester knows more about this than I do, but we work together with schools, secondary schools, where they mount a sensor on a bike and then they just cycle around the city. And also they have a NO2 tube at the school, or maybe several. And they can do their own research, their own analysis. And on the right, you see a picture. These are all sensor measurements, not just from schools, but from an earlier project using the same type of sensors. And you can really see differences between the different routes. So it's also a way of discussing what route do you take to school, but also maybe when we close a road or things like that, will it improve air quality? Another thing that we just published a few weeks ago is what we call Analyze Together, because there's a lot of citizens collecting data, but it's quite difficult to analyze air quality data because there's a lot of other factors involved, like the weather, the wind direction, and all these kind of things. So we try to make it as easy as possible to analyze your data and look for patterns. We heavily rely on the OpenAir package. So that has been great. That has been a great help. And here, for instance, you can compare your own sensor, your pollution rows compared to the official, the closest reference station. Or you can group sensors together and then compare the group to your own sensor or the group to another city. So we really try to make it as easy as possible. And the added benefit, let's say for us, is that we help people setting up some kind of a logical order in the visualization. So this is always a balance. On the one hand, we want people to have their own journey and their own data analysis and encounter their own question or raise their own questions. On the other hand, we have, let's say, a lot of experience in the air quality analysis. So we also know which visualizations are important. So this is the balance that we try to strike here between facilitating the analysis without telling people, oh, you have to look at this. And on the other hand, also drawing from our own experience of looking at air quality data. So you can see the web link there. It also has a GitHub repository, so everybody can use this and add to it. So please, if you're interested in do this, because we really want to make this a collaborative effort. This is from the Dutch guys. The reason I wanted to show this is their data portal, but we really move towards the combination of, let's say, the sensor data and the more local context, local knowledge. So on the Dutch Skies data portal, you can see what their own measurement questions are. So you can see on the map. So I think that's quite interesting to explore. Why are people measuring air quality here? We also developed an app where people can add contextual information within certain projects, but also where people can basically flag an hour for their sensor data. So my neighbor has a wood stove in his garden. So whenever he lights it, I could, let's say, flag my sensor data. So I know in my analysis what happened there. And the other thing that we really try to also use the more temporal information, so the minute data, where you can really see the peaks. This is another picture from Dutch Skies to show you that it's in Dutch, but there was one person who really noticed that during the weekends, his sensor readings were very high, and he also lived quite close to a cafe. So this is really, really local knowledge that we weren't able to spot from, let's say, the more national viewpoint. So really, the sensor allows you to combine sensor data and local knowledge, and then to have a more productive, let's say, dialogue. Esther knows more, and I'm sure Judith also knows this case. I'm going to skip this one. But this is from the City Ops project that I'm not sure Hester will still be able to talk about, but this is to show you that we also try to, or we have a few European projects that we're involved with. Beyond air quality, Sensor Community is also has published a few do-it-yourself kits for noise. And we did a few comparisons, and there will be a session later in the week also on do-it-yourself noise kits. So if you're interested in that, go to that session. And you can see that now, especially around airports, a lot of people start to measure noise. And the last slide, this is a big project that we're also involved with, where people measure soil moisture and temperature. We also try to see whether that's any useful for us. It's not, let's say, our core business, but this is one of the approaches we like to take just to get involved in these projects and then start to explore whether this also helps our own monitoring or modeling, or just to show you that there's a few thousands of these sensors in private gardens, which is a very underexplored area because obviously it's a private garden. So it will be interesting to see what comes out of that. So that was just my presentation.
Yeah.
Just fascinated by the moving sensor of the bicycle.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of that compared to the static ones. How do you interpolate them in terms of interpreting what has been found on them?
Yeah, it's much more difficult because you have a spatial gradient and a temporal gradient, and it's quite difficult to sometimes to let's say distinguish between them. But you can compare different, and there's a time aspect because some routes will be taken only in the morning, let's say, and others in the evening. So there's an article I could send it to you where we try to, let's say, establish a background concentration, and then on top of that we can like the excess that we measure is the, let's say, is the what we think is the added traffic emissions.
Presumably as well, you could use as an indicator to go and look in more detail.
Yeah, definitely. So, and that's with sensor data. Most of the times we use it as an indication and not, let's say, as a definitive absolute concentration. We really look for differences within the route, and the more measurements. I think this also had 1 billion measurements, so it becomes slightly easier to see differences.
I think it's a very nice example that we try to be flexible. Because this is something we got offered. I remember how we went. We were all, I was, and Joost Wesley, we were in a meeting in Germany, somewhere with all experts discussing citizen science and air quality and making a white paper. And one of the clear points that we all agreed on, that it was not a good idea to use mobile data. No mobile data. So all the things we disagreed on, this was one we were all very clear on. I went home 3 months later, there was this project in the province of Utrecht using mobile data. And so we are doing this, and it was because it was the local government who was just, they were thrilled to have a project which combined air quality with exercise. And that's specifically for school children. You combine exercise, school children, clean modes of transportation, and air quality measurements. It was irresistible.
It's an educational tool and an indicator.
Yeah, so, and then when we were faced with all this mobile data, and they said, okay, you go and analyze it. And we said, we never asked for this data. It's too difficult. And we are still figuring out what to do with it. So if you take all of it, if you have a lot and you take all of it and you do an analysis of everything together, you will get something nice out of it. But I think that the more promising is to look at school children again and see how they use the data, and what they can do is add their own information. So if it now, because these sensors also developed, because it used to be that they were just hanging on the bike, and when you got home, you could see your path and the values, the air quality concentrations. But now they have this nice light on it. So if you really hit a spot where the air quality is really bad, you see it flash red. And then I always, when I go to school, I tell them, please look around. Because if it's red, then something must be going on which produces this bad air quality. And you know what it is, you can see it. We cannot see it from the center of the country.
But also the data on the move, if you aggregate it at the end of the journey, it tells you what the individual's been exposed to.
Mm.
So that's another way of looking
Yeah.
at data, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of ways that we try to figure out what to do with the data. But the real story is that it's just irresistible for local governments, cities.
Because they tried this in Barcelona
Yeah,
way back with an EU funded project, and they developed sensors to put on bicycles, and they were commercially available for a while, but they never took off when the money dried up, the project dried up, which was a great shame. And
yes,
that,
actually, we have been pushing this company. Look, you have these beautiful sensors. They work as long as the bike is moving, because that is how it was programmed. And we told them, look, the bike is only moving for an hour a day at most. It's 1.5 hour to the school and 1.5 hour back.
the one
So we told them, please make them such that if you hang them,
still carry on working.
yeah, so that they work there, because you have a sensor that
The Barcelona,
that is how we use most of the
the
sensors.
Barcelona example was for on a bicycle, but also if you took the tube, the underground, you could actually monitor the pollution that you were exposed to on your journey. So it wasn't about monitoring the air quality in a particular location.
It's about
Telling you what you were exposed to when you went on your journey. And should you change your journey route? It's about risk management. And that's getting back to the health discussion.
Yeah. So that is also a very interesting way to use it. So, like we are a national institute. We do monitoring. So for us, it's a bit of a.
I have two questions before I lose them. One is any other country doing what you're doing that you're aware of, where they've tried to integrate the citizen science data into the official data monitoring sets? And do you know what the value is in cash terms for the data that you get from the citizens? Could you put a cash amount on it? And because the real answer is that when the federal agencies were looking at citizen science in
Not on the records. No.
Yeah.
To start with your last question, well, we've tried to make a business case, because that was one of the assignments from the government, make a business case for using sensor data. So we might close one of the official reference stations. I don't think we could make the business case, but also let's say the societal and the political climate changed because of the nitrogen issues that we're facing. So I don't think they will close the official reference station nowadays. So the whole discussion shifted. We're not using the sensor data in our official monitoring project yet. Because those are all yearly averages, and it's quite difficult to extract a good yearly average from sensors because they're not operational the whole year and they have biases. But it's definitely like an avenue that we're exploring. So yeah, I wouldn't put a figure on it, but some of the, let's say the NO2 tubes we do use in the official monitoring, and there we use volunteers. So if you pay them an hourly wage.
That's exactly what I mean. I think that the US did it. They looked at what biodiversity monitoring was worth to the federal agencies in the US, and they just started up the amount of time. And then they allocated a cost to that time and came up with an astronomical figure, which then people sit up and listen to. And in a way, it doesn't have to be, how can I put this tactfully? It doesn't have to be 99.9% accurate. It has to be 80% accurate. So it just to give an indication of what it would have cost you to get that data by any other means.
It's, yeah, but I once did that for, that was actually, I had the presentations, I'm sure some, because they asked me exactly this question, like what are the costs
Yeah.
of citizen science? And I did calculations for a network that we have in the Netherlands for ammonia tubes. And we have around 500 tubes in 200 locations. And they are exchanged every month by nature conservative, what's it called, boswachter.
When they exchange every month, so
They work there, they protect the area, there's nature area, they change and they are volunteers because it's not in the job description. So they're professionals, but not for this thing. And so this network would be totally impossible without their help. Because the amount that you get is in the millions, hundreds of millions. Because if you can imagine it from the city center here, you would go to one of the islands there, which has a ferry only once a day, or at least you can make it one way and not the other way. So it would take you 2 days to replace the tube in the islands, and you would get one guy to do for 500 locations in all nature areas. That's impossible. So these kind of networks, these are all volunteers.
yeah.
You can imagine that this would not be practical.
I think the US, all they did was work out how much time the volunteers allocated to the project and put a price on that. They didn't price it on the basis, if we did this officially, what would it cost us? And now this is a cheaper way of doing it. What they just said is, we've had, I don't know, how many person hours have been allocated voluntarily. We'll put an arbitrary price on that, and that gives you some idea.
You can calculate something very easily. For all these dots are particulate matter sensor kits. So there's 3,000. So there are roughly 100 euros a piece. So 300,000 euros just in
themselves.
Yeah.
But then the time that the volunteers put in is the other allocation, which is never cost.
Well, that's
what the US did. They came up with this very big number, which a university put together, and that went into a paper that went to the White House, and that justified the Citizen Science Act in the US.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing that senior policymakers listen to.
That's a good point.
And it's just we miss a trick if we don't actually make that case that you could not get this data any other way.
Yeah.
No,
you're right. And I think it's important. And the other thing I think you said was that we shouldn't look at it as a way to make our work, let's say, cheaper.
That's right.
But just to show the value of the work in itself, because that's why I was a bit hesitant.
Citizen science get very nervous when you start saying it's cheaper to do it this way.
Yeah.
No, it's better to do it this way.
And to answer your first question, I think we're probably, the only country maybe that tries to really incorporate it in the official monitoring project. Maybe Flanders is also trying to do this. And
I want to be careful, so if I make that statement, no one's going to shoot me down. That was all.
Yeah, but I think. But this is my personal hypothesis, so I'm not sure. But I think that it helps when you have something like Measure Together, which is slightly, that's what I started with. Slightly different from your official institute.
Yeah.
Because it allows you to experiment and it allows you to do things that aren't part of the official tasks. So
I don't want to take too much time here, but just imagine when you did the Air Quality Framework Directive. If you wrote into the Air Quality Framework Directive that one of the ways to demonstrate compliance with the Air Quality Framework Directive is the use of citizen science data, and here are the techniques that we would recommend you to use, the framework we would recommend you to use. Now, is that bad cuckoo land? Is that possible? The answer is yes, because we've now got, and in the Plastics Directive, the Single-Use Plastics Directive, citizen science data was used to justify which single-use plastics were banned. So you've already started using citizen science data there, but it was never written into the legislation. If you go to the international arena, the Kunming Montreal Biodiversity Framework, for the very first time, when it comes to the implementation mode, includes citizen science, but nobody knows how to do it. They said you should use citizen science data in demonstrating compliance with the framework. But colleagues up in Denmark go, how do we do that? You know, because the framework's not there yet.
Yeah, so actually I was going to tell you in the last 5 minutes about this European project I'm in, which is called City Ops, which is essentially a project where we combine all kinds of networks and tools that already exist to combine them so that everybody else can use them and then, you know, use them in other places. But I'm also involved in another European project, which is called More for Nature.
Yep.
And in More for Nature, we are really looking for compliance assurance. So how can you use the citizen science data for policy making, but also making people aware and stuff like that. So that is really the More for Nature project is really the one where we will start talking to policymakers, start looking at policies. How can we find ways in? Because there are ways. We have to find a way that citizen science is allowed.
That's right.
And for the tubes, they are already allowed. They have the status of indicative measurement. But we are also looking at models, because models are also allowed as long as you can prove that the model is equivalent to using measurements, and you can use part of your measurements, you can replace them by model calculations. And in these model calculations, we can use the citizen science. So we are looking for ways to find.
No, it's very interesting. The official monitoring networks tend to look at the official monitoring approaches and see how they could apply them with citizen science. What they don't do is go to the citizens and work out what are the techniques and the methods. You're doing this. What are the techniques and the methods that citizen scientists can use, and what value does that add to the official monitoring network? So don't try and impose the official methods on the citizens. Create new frameworks that are more appropriate for citizens to use, and you're doing that. But capture that, because everybody who tries to do air quality, it's the same buffer when they try to get the data in to the official monitoring networks. It doesn't match the official monitoring data sets. It's not statistically valid, blah, 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 blah.
No.
They don't use it for what it's been generated to do. And there's huge interest because, you know, when we set up the Citizen Science Association, ECSA, in 2013, the Environment Commissioner launched it. And he was at Green Week that week, and he was going on about the problem of air quality in Europe, killing more people, now we know, than COVID-19 does globally. And he had all the statistics there. And here we are 10 years later, nothing's changed. Nothing's
No,
better.
these changes take very, very long.
Yeah.
So I do think that we have come already a long way, and that we are maybe in the next 4 years we'll make a few more steps. So, but that is only one direction that the citizen science has value.
Yeah.
So you can look at official monitoring and getting more and more impression that the real value of the citizen science data is on a very local scale. Like this guy that Henri showed. This one is such a beautiful story because this guy was having these air quality problems on Friday nights, on Saturday nights, but and there were huge peaks.
And then you can do something about it.
And he had already demonstrated that because some company came to his house to measure how bad it was. But the thing is, in this project, there are more sensors throughout the city. And you can just look at the other places. This is in the city of Haarlem, and the other sensors in Haarlem were measuring exactly the same thing as this sensor. Exactly the same, except for Friday nights and Saturday nights. So in that point, you demonstrate it is really the smokers outside. You make pictures of the smokers. You show the facts which was done. So, but the important thing was the other sensors, right? Because if you have one sensor with a high peak, the first expert that comes along, me too, you say, okay, yeah, but you have a huge peak, but maybe the whole country had a huge peak, right?
But for me, the whole thing about this is start local, but go global. Because everything you're
Yeah,
doing.
so it will be on a very local scale, there will be added value.
Yeah.
And I hope also on a global scale, because, yeah, also.
Because the UN is desperate for new approaches to get the global environmental agreements implemented, because they're not working. If you ask somebody, they call them multilateral environmental agreements, can you name me one that's worked? They'll name you one, that's fluorocarbons. That's the only one. All the others fail to meet their targets. So the aspiration is written in. I'm generalizing, you can drill down, you might criticize me a bit, but I'm generalizing. The aspiration is written into these agreements, the delivery doesn't come. And we need new delivery mechanisms. And I just personally feel that citizen science is the new kid on the block and could be the new delivery mechanism for some of these agreements. Not to challenge the official data sets, but to help the official data sets come to terms with what the environment ministers have all agreed they want to do. So it's not asking them to do something different, you're just asking them to do it better. But we won't do it unless we start to agree what the techniques are that work, that suit the citizens, that will be acceptable to the official monitoring networks. And we've got a framework to work within. And we stop reinventing the wheel. I mean, Rosie was on the train with me coming across here. Rosie Mondardino said, I am sick of going to citizen science conferences where they reinvent the wheel, where they've done it before, we know what works, and then it gets forgotten, and then we come along and do it all again. We're not capturing the standard methods that work and sharing them globally, because go to Baku in outer Mongolia, guess what? They've got an air quality problem in the city. It kills people. Go to the centre of Nairobi, there's an air quality problem. Because old cars never die, they just go to Kenya, is the expression I use, which is probably a bit unfair. But these are the problems that the world has got.
Yes, so that's
Europe and put the money in to develop the ideas and the techniques, and we're not sharing them. Not enough anyhow. We are sharing to some extent. That's my plea.
Yeah, so that is really big challenge to not reinvent the wheel and to be sustainable, right? So to have a project working not until 2029, but continuously, and just be able to, and that is one of the goals we had with Measure Together. It's really to have, this is not a citizen science project.
Yeah.
It's a citizen science infrastructure. So these are all different projects.
But
that feed into this infrastructure, and the infrastructure is just there. If the project dies.
This is great, but it's still nation state.
And that's yeah. So we would like to start with Belgium, just invade them and stay there. So we are talking to them because So that would be our first step. That would be really very interesting. And I think we are now at the point of discussing with them. Saying, look, you have this beautiful data platform. We don't care if you include the Netherlands, and then we will include Flanders. And then we have, 2 data portals, and they are exactly the same or it's slightly different, but we have, You
can have the code, you can take it, you can use it. So it's open science, isn't it?
It's all open science. So in fact, it would not be so difficult we have one guy running this data portal, it's called Derco. It would not be difficult for him to just take all of Europe and put it in one data portal. But the thing is, there are these sensitivities. And so
that's why we've got something called the EU Green Deal Support Team, which is underpinning Horizon 2020 research programs, and they are now pushing us to write policy papers to go to the Commission, which starts to talk about how you integrate citizen science into legislation. And what we have in mind is things like the Air Quality Framework Directive, the Water Quality Framework Directive, in the same way that we did for plastics and single-use plastics. And it has to start at the top, because with all the will in the world, all my experience is that member states find it very difficult to spend money outside the member state area. Yeah,
Exactly.
and if you have an air quality problem,
I mean, yeah, it's already, I mean, we are now starting on noise measurements and soil measurements. And that is already difficult because this whole data platform is actually paid for by the ministry that is responsible for air quality, but not noise.
so if you look at the whole mechanism of the Air Quality Framework Directive, underneath it is a whole series of working groups that were put together to agree the methodologies that were going to be used by all the member states. Nothing's ever been done for citizen science like that. And so that's the framework I'm talking about that's lacking. So it's all very well to say I'd like to build citizen science into the Air Quality Framework Directive. How? You need to get a framework. And it's not the official monitoring framework because it won't work with citizens. It's something different. And I think that's going to come from us. And it's going to come from the local pilots that prove methodologies and prove the technology and then build it up. But that's just me talking at the moment.
I hope we can do something like that in More for Nature, but we are going to end this meeting now because we are all, tired. I worked hard, so I'm skipping the last presentation.